Welcome to Starfleet Universe On Call. I am Paul France, owner of France Games. I'm an SFU Online, FedCom Online, and Starfleet Warlord. Just a reminder how to join us for the Talkcast every Thursday night, starting at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You can either call on the phone, just dial 605-562-0444. Just follow the directions. The call ID is 17702. Or you can participate on the web. Just go to the Talkshow website at www.talkshow.com. Search for call ID 17702 or SFU On Call or Starfleet Universe On Call. Or for the best online experience, go to twitch.tv. Yes, twitch.tv. So go to twitch.tv/SFU On Call. And you will find us right there and be able to join the wonderful chat room and join in on the conversation. And if you need to contact me for any reason, my email address is sfuoncall@gmail.com. It's sfuoncall@gmail.com. And if you want to follow me on Twitter or X or whatever they're calling it this week, you can follow me on SFU On Call or you can also follow me my personal account called Paul Franz, or also you can follow me on Franz Games, which is of course related to SFU Online, FedCom Online, and Starfleet Warlord. Now, if this lovely talkcast gets turned into a podcast available on iTunes and various other feeds around the net. Some quick news from A to B this week. It's relatively quiet because they've all been getting over COVID. Oh, fun. The virus that keeps on giving. Some quick, found on the online store this week is the F&E Civil War's double-sided counter sheet. It's only $8, but it's 280 counters. Yes, you can add to your wonderful collection of counters. This is a double-sided sheet from Civil Wars, including the Pink Romulans, the rebellious Brown Zintis, the Wind ships, the ones that are able to leave the cluster, the loyal Lyrans from the early years, and also the rebellious Purple Lyrans. You can use them for Civil Wars or simply extra counters to mark special fleets or other sectors. Moving on forward to the SFB Online tournament, the Sapphire Star 14 tournament. That one is up to the finals. That is going to be Jack Taylor in GBS versus Jeff Clark. I see they're going to be playing on Friday, August 11th, and that's going to be at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you want to watch such a wonderful game, please join them at 5 o'clock Eastern Time. If you can't make it 5, make it a little bit later, and that's fine. But they'll be starting at 5, so you don't want to miss anything. Might want to log in at 5. And moving onward and forward to the library, nothing when it comes to the client, not much happening there this week. Been busy with other things. And also when it comes to the library report, when it comes to the SFB library, I actually got around to updating the Klingon ships that the redo of the Klingon ships that Frank did. And also on top of that, I did fix there was a Fed ship that I fixed, and I can't remember off the top of my head. Frank gave it to me to fix the campaign because I think it was a scout that was missing a special sensor. And so with that is the news for this week. And it's me, someone else, Paul Friends, welcoming you to Starfleet Universe On Call. And tonight, we have Gary. Say hi, Gary.
Hi, Gary.
And we have Doug. Say hi, Doug.
Hello, how are you doing?
Good, doing good.
How's everybody doing tonight?
Pretty good. It's been a long day. Just because I've been driving back and forth between here in Baltimore just to go see the Orioles win, which was good. It was kind of crazy and slightly insane just because of rough game. I'm not gonna go through the whole thing here because this is not supposed to be about baseball, even though sometimes I wish it was. But at the same time, I don't think I actually could do a baseball podcast, to be honest. I don't think I have enough knowledge about baseball and follow it closely enough to actually, talk about it in a clear, concise, and more importantly, thoughtful manner. So, with that, we'll move on forward. And Gary, you wanted to bring back the topic about the Tholians basically ending up in the Omega Octant, or is it, or are you thinking about something
Okay.
place else?
So, well, all right. So, right now on the BBS, there's two topics that I've set up. Anyone's welcome to pop in if they want. One of them is the one that we spoke about before, about the Tholians in Omega. The second one is about Tholians in the Magellanic Cloud. And in that topic, Steve Petra kindly pointed out that there's a few things that need to be kind of like figured out ahead of time before the question of them going anywhere other than the galactic barrier is set. So basically, now when the Tholians are coming to our galaxy, they have the wrong impression about how strong the barrier is. But nonetheless, they have an impression. So if something happens to give them the impression that the barrier is either stronger than they think it is, or that the something happens to their engines maybe on the sphere and it can't cross, then they have to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm not too sure how clear it is in terms of how much spare resources they have, because there is talk in the notes about a lot of the systems are being cannibalized just to get to the Milky Way. But
Right.
in theory, if the engines are still in good condition, the Tholians might basically park the sphere just long enough to restock and then try some other galaxy instead, like Triangulum or something like that. But that would basically steer them away from the Milky Way entirely. So the issue would be what would happen to both prevent them from coming into the galaxy, and then also make them have to stick around in the vicinity of the galaxy. So I posted something more recently to try to kind of pick that apart.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the various like stuff that's going on, either like the quote unquote real astrogeography, or if you look at the stuff that's made up for the Starfleet universe, you've got various like intergalactic space is not entirely empty. So you've got like rogue planetoids, or your random black holes or other kind of things or whatever.
Right.
But then you've also got you might have some deep space life forms, like for example the Banshees from Module K. A captain's log. There was an issue of captain's log that introduced a more dangerous variant of them that actually operates outside of the galaxy. And I guess they're more dangerous because they got less to feed on, so any feeding opportunities they have to take the most of.
Mm-hmm.
And then also you've got the issue of other extragalactic wandering things like a death probe or juggernaut or something like that you might run into, and that might ruin your day. So it's likely that instead of drawing a single line from the home galaxy to the Milky Way and saying that straight line is what they took, it's probably more likely that it kind of zigged and zagged a little bit, like at various stages.
Right.
And there's probably like points where they had to slow down. Like say, for example, they started running out of a certain material, so maybe they pull up to the nearest planetoid that they'd find in open space and melt it down for the resources that they need to keep the sphere going for another, how many years or decades or whatever. Because actually, there's something similar that there is in a story about the Sultorians in Captain's Log 41.
Right.
With the Sultorian sage who's in command of this hive ship. He's literally talking about all these like dwarf galaxies or objects, whatever, that are like decades away from where the hive ship is, and he's like calculating. All right, well, if we go here and then we do that, then we do this, then we do that, and so forth. Because in that story, the hive ship that he's in controlling is being attacked by juggernauts, and so he's calculating. All right, well, if we head towards this dwarf galaxy now, then we'll run into Juggernaut ABC or whatever at this point, and then maybe the next one after that, and then before the next one after that shows up, we can get to this dwarf galaxy and try to start to grab the resources and stuff. So
Right.
I guess there's very long-term thinking employed.
Mm-hmm.
And so Basically, the way I would see it is now again, this is just my own thing, so
Mm-hmm.
we have to see what ADB thinks about it, if ever.
Right.
Is the ziggy-zag route that the sphere historically took is the one. It's not necessarily the most optimal route, but it's the baseline,
Right.
and that's the one that got them to where they are now. But so you could basically have 3 different degrees of separation. One degree is that the sum total of adjustments is not that big, but it still means that they arrive somewhere in the galaxy. So they either arrive in Omega, or maybe in Sargasso. So maybe they'll end up, hopefully, if they go into Sargasso, they end up in a clear pocket, because
Right.
if they don't, then life's going to be.
Then they're dead.
And yeah. So I mean, they really don't want to end up in the Sorcalian area, because then they'll get squished. But so that's I guess degree 1, and then degree 2 would be that maybe something happens to them, like they get into a big fight and the engines get damaged, or maybe there's a natural phenomenon that screws things up, or maybe the engines just break down because, I mean, there's both. Because like in the galaxy, one reason why Tholian ships can't have legendary engineers is because anyone who qualifies as a legendary engineer gets redirected to the sphere, like maintaining it or repairing it. So they're not quite in that bad of straits while they're still intergalactic space, but it's possible that if even one Tholian, slips and falls or something, or has a bad crystal day, then maybe some sort of like breakdown is worse than expected or whatever. So that would basically mean that they might decide that they're going to have to park the ship. They're going to have to park the sphere somewhere.
Right.
But they don't want to risk going through the barrier. So that means, do they go to the Draco, and do they find the Draco colony 100 years early? Or do they divert to the Magellanic Cloud so that they can have more resources but run the risk of having more trouble? And so on.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third degree of separation would be something happens maybe 100 years earlier, where it diverts them away from the Milky Way entirely. And in that case, they basically go directly to some other galaxy like Triangulum, or hopefully not Andromeda. But yeah, so
Right.
that basically means that if the player, the people, the game designers or the speculators are thinking of, well, how are we going to break this down into something that SFB or FedCom players can actually do something with, then I was thinking that maybe those degrees of separation might be a way to systematize it, so to speak, so that it all more or less fits together. So does that make sense? Or
Yeah. Yeah, basically you're placing out multiple scenarios that could have possibly happened, including meeting up with the Tholian of Draco, but in theory, Tholians could completely have missed our galaxy altogether. There's so many different scenarios that could have taken place. It's like because also if you think about it, that any delays on when the Tholians actually arrived would mean, I mean, if you discount the whole issue of the year, when it comes to their effect on the alpha octant as it stood, because that's one thing. Well, I don't think either of us really discussed with the whole idea of the Tholians landing in the Omega octant, which is, of course, what effect it has on the Alpha octant if the Tholians aren't there to be between, the Romulans and the Klingons. Without causing, and basically, because my understanding is the Romulans really did not attack the Tholians that much. They really didn't care that much about the Tholians, and they didn't really press things too hard. Obviously, they use them as a testing ground, but really didn't push to try to take over that territory. While while the Klingons just want them gone. You know, because that's just one less front that they'd actually have to fight.
Right.
So,
Well, historically, oh god.
no, go.
So in the historical timeline, the Klingons were actually using that territory as a launching pad to conquer the Romulan Empire. And had the Tholians not shown up, they probably would have succeeded. So there's actually a Federation and Empire scenario where the Romulan Empire is replaced by a thing called the Imperial Klingon Marches, which is still, it's like, you think about like in the days before the Industrial Revolution, like if you look at the Spanish colonies in Mexico and Peru and stuff, like you would have the Viceroyalty of New Spain. So the Viceroy would be there on behalf of the King in Madrid. But in reality, he's basically running the show himself because there's such a time lag in distance between Mexico City and Madrid so the similar sort of thing where basically the IKM is kind of like a quasi-allied realm of the Klingon Empire, based on Romulus, but they're still building Klingon ships because they take over the Romulan fleet yards, and because at the time the Romulans had primitive sublight ships, or whatever. So
right.
the Klingons basically eventually retooled the shipyards to build Klingon ships. But that also means that you never see the Mauler cannon or the cloaking device because they never get developed. But I mean, so it could be interesting to kind of tweak it a bit because module R4J has an alternate scenario where the Romulans develop warp early, so they're at no threat from being conquered by the Klingons, even if the Tholians don't show up. Or you could even mix in the Paravians from module C6 and say that if the Klingons take over the Romulans, then maybe the Gorns hold back from defeating the Paravians because they have to watch the Klingons now. And that means that the Paravians get a stay of execution, and if they trigger the ISC to an early activation, maybe you have a version of the map from module C6, but you basically have the ISC on one side, the Paravians to the north, the Gorns, but instead of having the Romulans, you've got the IKM. And so maybe it's the Klingons who are the ones who are allied to the Paravians instead of the Romulans.
Mm-hmm.
Although in that case, the Klingons would want to make sure that any of their lizard species that are subject in the Klingon Empire are never sent to Romulus, because if the Paravians see them, they'll try to kill them.
Interesting. So basically, you're saying that the Tholians actually saved the Romulan Empire, which is one of the possible.
They sure did, yeah. Although the Romulans were very grateful for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, what was it? 2 weeks ago, I think it was. That basically we went through the alternate, module R4J, where we went through the alternate histories. To me, I still think one of the most interesting alternate histories is the big switcheroo between the Vulcans and the Romulans. I mean, the passive Vulcans are the ones who left, while the more warlike Vulcans, they stayed and they extended their society, and they actually not control. I was gonna say control, but that's not the word that really describes them well, which is influenced. Yeah, that's influenced the Federation at the early beginning, and instead of becoming, the Federation United Federation of Planets, it was what is it? Oh, what do they call
Federal
it?
Imperial.
Yeah, thank you. The Federal. So to me, I think that's one of the more interesting alternate universes for the Romulans, because just because of we in my mind, we didn't really see that explicitly ever mentioned. Maybe it's mentioned in other material that I've not read, which is possible. That the Vulcans had an influence on the starting of the United Federation of Planets. You know, even
Well, in the regular timeline, the Vulcans had, I guess you could call it an early form of the Prime Directive. So they knew about Andorians and humans, whatever, but they avoided making first contact until those species developed warp drive.
understood. And the thing
But
is, and and here, and of course, then there's the whole issue of I was just thinking about this, which is okay if the Tholians actually, let's say they still arrived at the Milky Way, but they were delayed by whatever circumstances. They're coming actually in possibly in the middle if they landed in the Alpha Octant, which might not be the case, because of course you got to remember that the Milky Way is turning. Also, now I'll have to agree that let's say it was 100 years. 100 years is not a really big time when it comes to the actual rotation of the Milky Way. So you wouldn't that wouldn't really affect the landing spot, basically, for the Tholians. And if the Tholians arrived instead of, I think, what was it, 167? Or earlier than that? Do you remember, Gary?
Well, historically, they arrived in Y79.
179, okay. If they would have arrived in Y179, it would have been definitely a totally different animal altogether, because of the Tholians themselves wouldn't, in my mind, wouldn't have seemed, it wouldn't be as superior as they were when they first arrived. It's only because they arrived at the time they did that their phasers and their weapons were actually more advanced than the weapons that were used by the Klingons. Yes, they didn't have like heavy weapons, but that didn't matter. They had better phasers, and that's all they really needed to at least to help them at the beginning. But if in Y179, the Klingons were in full war mode, because that's the middle of the general war. So if the Tholians would land, quote unquote, landed then the question would be, is that would they even survived?
Probably not.
Yeah. I'm thinking that
They're just so outgunned. If you have them as they were when they are first show up in the SFU, then no, they're not going to survive in the general war, because they're going to be totally outgunned and outclassed at every level, pretty much. So it's just a random thought. Instead of like trying to finagle all that, if you want to have them in the Omega Quadrant, why not just say there was a second group of refugees? I mean, the place they come from, although maybe not as large as the Milky Way, I forget the history on that exactly, but it's still huge, and a galaxy-wide revolution. When you look at the scale of all that, it's entirely possible that there may have been more than one group of Tholians that headed out to different places, and maybe several groups went towards the same one. And like it was mentioned in the other part, there's a lot of stuff potentially in between the two galaxies. And if you really think about it, on the scale of intergalactic travel, even at the speeds that you're talking about that allow it to happen, it's not a straight line. It's more like a huge curveball kind of, because you're trying to catch the other thing that's moving, And even though you have a pretty good idea where it's going, it's still so far away that you have to keep getting closer until you can get your measurements down. So it's not going to be a perfect shot like, if we tried for the moon, because even if we try for the moon, we still have to make adjustments a little bit here and there as you
Right.
go for
Agreed.
different reasons. But if you see what I'm saying, you could have a different group altogether just land in the Omega Quadrant for, whatever purpose that you want. They didn't have contact with the other group, or they were part of they had more than one group that went and they lost contact along the way and they didn't know where they were going and they didn't have time to screw around and scout and just went straight on in. Boom, there you go. Because they were desperate and they wanted a place to be and not be out in the middle of, intergalactic space.
Right.
Where there's like next to nothing comparatively speaking.
Right. Or the whole
That's
idea
just my
of
random thought on it.
or the whole idea of also of having a small expeditionary force that split off from the main force, and the idea was that it was going to penetrate the barrier and then come back and you say, okay, this is what we found, kind of thing. And they didn't realize that after they penetrated the galactic barrier that there's no coming back out.
Yeah, they're stuck.
Yeah, you're stuck. In which case you can't.
There's that.
And your communications
is
cut off.
Wanted to have
so.
But if you also want to have a large presence of them, it could be a different refugee group altogether.
Right. Agreed.
I mean, it could be anything. I mean, you could go with the hand wavium aspect of that.
Agreed.
But I think given the scale of what happened in their home galaxy before they came, their records that you get in the canon of the SFU are from the perspective of those guys that got there. And they may not know about another group that said, hey, we're going to get out of here too, from another part of their home galaxy. And that group might have a completely different setup. They might have all their stuff. They might just be in smaller numbers to balance it out. You never know. I mean, it could be a playtest issue or a matter of simple taste of the scenario designer. So.
Understood. And I would think. Yes, Gary?
So I'm sure if I wanted to go first, but yeah. So there are in both Module C5 and in the Omega Master Rulebook, there are kind of little side notes and stuff where they leave the door ajar to Tholians or Sultorians showing up or whatever. In terms of whether it's likely to happen, again, I'm not speaking for ADV, but I'm under the impression that Sultorians are more likely to show up somewhere, if only because they're the ones in charge back in the home galaxy now, and they have the spare resources to be able to send tribunal expeditions either to galaxies that they know the Tholians have fled to, or that they think they might have fled to, and they wanted to just be sure. Because so it's, and also a hive ship or even an S ship is basically a self-contained campaign generator. So it'd be a lot easier to basically park a hive ship or an S ship in somewhere new in the universe, and then see how long the Sultorians last. But for the Tholians, I get the impression that they might not necessarily want to make them have too many exile groups show up after the revolt. I think they want to kind of highlight the fact that Tholians in the universe are an endangered species. So they probably, it took a long time for them to introduce the Tholians of Draco, and even then, I guess there's very specific circumstances that kind of involve that. So I suspect, although I don't have any confirmation of this, but I suspect that in terms of in the historical timeline, having new groups from the home galaxy show up, it's probably maybe an 80-20 or 60-40 more likely that it would be the Sultorians rather than the Tholians. But which is not necessarily a bad thing. But that's one reason why, I guess, because the other thing as well is that even though we don't have like an early years module for Federation and Empire, so we don't have the formal, order of battle and production schedule and so forth for the really early holdfast. We still know quite a bit about it. We still know enough to make it a very useful baseline. So if you have the same faction with the same steps that they had to take in terms of recovering their old technology or designing new things like being able to weld their hulls together to build cruisers and stuff, that is basically a template that can be applied to what if scenarios, placing the sphere in some other place. So it does. I wouldn't want to be the one to say that this means that there can't actually be other historical groups elsewhere. But I guess the point I was going for is that looking at it this way is maybe a good way of figuring out how it would actually function in campaign terms or in game terms, so that if there ever was a historical thing added to the universe at some point, then the tools would be in place to make it easier to do. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I had a question for you, Gary, which is, to your knowledge, were there any other Dyson spheres except for the one? I mean, when it comes to being brought along with the exiles, they're running away from the Sultorians, other than the one for their home. How to say home Dyson sphere? Let's put it that way at the moment.
The only other one that was known so far, at least, that was known, because the problem is this: in the home galaxy, the spheres are only given their engines long enough to place them where they're going to be placed, and then the engines are removed or disabled or whatever. So a lot of these spheres back in the home galaxy were actually immobile. It's only the very new construction spheres that would still have their engines, or that would be given the engines in the first place. So when the revolt happened, a lot of the spheres that the Sultorians destroyed were sitting ducks, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So far as we know, the only other sphere that escaped the initial revolt was one that's actually in the Draco article, because the ships, like the Sojourner, that eventually became the Tholians of Draco, they were basically trying to protect a different sphere that was fleeing towards a different set of galaxies. But that sphere was actually caught and destroyed by the Sultorians. So when the Sultorians destroyed the sphere and went back home again, they assumed that they didn't do a thorough job of chasing down the survivors. So they assumed that they were done with in any case. So, but what the future Dracos did is basically pick up as many survivors as they could, and then head towards the Milky Way. So, and then they would eventually become the Tholians of Draco. So, so far we know of two spheres that escaped the initial crisis, but only one of them is still around in the present day.
Okay. Yeah, I'm assuming we don't know. We have no idea of how many groups of exiles there were, at least in the current SFU universe. History. Sorry.
Well, I guess they probably don't want to be too
I'm
about that.
Yeah, I'm more curious than anything else because
they don't want to put it down too preemptively. Yeah.
What was that? I'm sorry.
But actually, another kind of half of this topic I wanted to bring up, because we've talked before about where they might have gone, at least in Omega, because with the Magellanic Cloud, that might be an interesting topic as well.
Right.
But another side of it would be what kind of weapons or technology they would use when they get there, and what kind of enemies they'd be expected to fight. So, ironically enough, I think it's actually easier to figure that out for the Magellanic Cloud than it is for Omega, because do you have the web browser open right now?
Yep.
Okay, so could you go to the ADB homepage?
I'm going. I'm there.
All right, so if you click on the tab for Starfleet Battles,
Okay.
and then scroll down to where it says SFB in the Magellanic Cloud.
Got it.
And on that page, you should see there's a link to a PDF with a map of the LMC.
Okay. Okay. Which one? You mean the view of a map as an island galaxy, or
That's the one, yeah.
oh, that's the one. Okay, so the small one, not one. Okay, this. Okay.
All right. So you can see how, like, on the left-hand side of the map, there's the Badavai Imperium, and on the right there's the Anin, and then you've got a bunch of the fringe space surrounding the two of them. So now, historically, the Andromedans basically showed up in the northwest part of the map. So during the first wave of conquest, they did a pincer movement to attack the Badavai and Anin at the same time. And one of the reasons why they were able to do that is because you see there's an area that's marked NW.
Neutral worlds.
So that is the neutral worlds. Because what happened is, So what happened is, in the timeline, the Badavai and Anin first encountered each other to the south of the core region. So the southern area that you see there, that was the more built-up region. But to the north, they were slower to get up there. So when they did, they were scrabbling for territory. But in the middle of the scrabble, the Magadim from the core basically started bursting out for the first time. And once the Badavai and Anin realized that there was a potentially common enemy, they signed an accord which created the neutral world. So they're basically their two provinces, and the resources from the neutral zone is divided evenly between the Badavai and the Anin. But by doing that, they turned the neutral world into a flashpoint, because the Magadim would launch 2 full-scale wars to try to burst out of the core to take it over, and also the Anin and Badavai would wage war over who gets to control it once and for all. Of course, the Andromedans had something to say about all that. So by the time the Andromedan invasion started, there had been 2 major wars. The first between the Badavai and Anin, and the second between both of them and the Magadim. So they were all economically exhausted. But that basically meant that the Andromedans basically were able to start with the upper hand in terms of attacking both sides. So, but the handy thing is that area, it's relatively late that area becomes fortified or heavily occupied. So by the time the Tholians would show up, that area would be actually probably the most optimal place for the whole fast to set up. So if you basically just say that the Sphere's engines give up at the point where they get there, then the Tholians by default have to take that space over. But from a game design perspective, it's probably the most optimal place to put them.
Okay, question. Okay, so are you saying that where the neutral worlds are, that basically that part would actually be taken over by the Tholians? Am I hearing that right?
Well, I would propose that. I would say that that is a contingency that's worth exploring. Because in theory, you could have the Tholians show up anywhere in the Magellanic Cloud, but the other options are not good options. but the neutral world is the best one in terms of giving them enough breathing space to get started, but also giving them access to local technology that they can steal and use to replace the particle cannon.
Right. Right.
And speaking of the technology, there's two main weapons I want to talk about. And the first one is from the Inine. It's a weapon called the neutron beam.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the neutron beam it takes 5 points of power to fire, and it has a cooling down cycle after you fire it. So it's single turn arming, but then you've got the cooldown. And when you're firing it, you have an option of firing it at a narrow aperture, like a phaser, like a disruptor, basically, or wide aperture, like a phaser. So what the Inine often do is when they have the neutron beam on their ships, because of how expensive it is to fire it, they set their firing arcs in LF plus L and RF plus R. And they fire only half of them in a turn. And then they fire the other half on the second turn, and vice versa. So they're alternating back and forth. So their ships are designed to be, more obliquey, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when you think about it, the Tholians already do that, because if you look at a Tholian cruiser, it's got two heavy weapon points, but they're both LF plus L and RF plus R. So if you create a Tholian cruiser that has two neutron beams instead of two disruptors, then the game already, like the Inine already basically offered the template in terms of how you're going to fly that ship in battle. Do you have any of the? Do you have module C5 on your PDF on your computer?
That's what I'm actually looking for, and just wondering if I have it. I don't see it at the moment. Just give me a sec.
You're taking.
Oh, I did not mean to do that. I did not mean
Well, you can actually see on Shapeways, if you look at the miniature for the Inine heavy cruiser, it actually has the neutron beam mounts facing 60 degrees left and right to represent the fact that they're LF plus L and RF plus R on the SST.
Okay. No, I don't. At the moment, I don't think I actually have that one. No. Ah, there it is. Actually, no, I got the SS. No, I'm not sure that would do it. I've got the SSD book, but I don't have the rules for modules.
Well, the SSD book will do. You can bring that up and go to whichever page has the Inine heavy cruiser.
Hmm? Okay, need heavy cruiser. That would be. Need heavy cruiser. That's page 737. Oops. And that is the scout. There it is. Okay. Right there. There it is. Okay. And you're talking about the neutron beam?
Yeah, you're going to see two firing charts on the SSD. One of them is for the narrow mode, and one is for the wide mode.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Now, bear in mind that the range brackets, because the Inine don't use phasers, they use warp-tuned lasers, so the firing brackets for the neutron beam, they're designed to match those of the lasers. So if the Tholians were using it, they'd have to get used to trying to figure out which of the range brackets matches best with phaser ones.
Right. Okay. Is there any special army requirement, like when it comes to what kind of power it can use?
They arm from any source of power.
Okay, just want to double check on that. Yeah, definitely changed things a bit because obviously the one minor issue, and then I do think it's a minor issue, which is that these weapons are designed with the LMC in the context of LMC, i.e., the what close range, I guess you can call it. Um, in Alpha Octant, it's all the way out to range 8, while for the LMC, it looks like it tops the quote top range is like range 6 for that in that context. While the phaser ones, they're good out to range 5, which is kind of different from the actual, for the rest of the weapons, for the weapons in the LMC. For example, when it comes to the neutron beam, the narrow, it goes all the way out to range 6. 1 to 4. If you want to go out to range 12, it can be, still 1 to 4. But after it gets outside of range 6, damage goes from 12 down to 6. And I don't think that actually costs any more energy at all. And given that, there's going to be there's going to be incongruity between the two weapons, the phaser ones and neutron beam, if you have them on the same ships.
True, but of the weapons that would be available to the Tholians in this scenario, I think it would be the least worst option. Because some of the other empires are either have restricted technology, or they're on the other side of the co-radiation shell, or they're not direct fire heavy weapons. So, I wouldn't give the Tholians the plasma weapons that the Indian have, for example. So, when you think about it, I mean, it's just a lucky coincidence that the Tholians in Alpha took to disruptors and photons so well. Because I guess beforehand there was no. I mean, those ships. I mean, you and I know that when ADB created those SSDs, they designed them with disruptors in mind. But from an in-universe perspective, those ships were designed with particle cannons in mind, or phasers only in the case of the patrol corvette. So it's just a lucky fluke that disruptors worked as well as they did. So in this case, it's just one of those things to show that the Tholians in this pocket galaxy would have to try to make do or find a new normal, so to speak.
Agreed. And as you pointed out, yeah, definitely the plasma torpedo would not be good for the Tholians, and not just for not that it's too powerful of a weapon. It just doesn't. It would not work well with the web at all. They need it so that it's a direct fire weapon versus a seeking weapon. If for nothing else, just for timing, because of what was that?
Well, the other thing as well is that the plasma E is actually a very weak plasma. The only reason why it works for the Indian at all is because warp-tuned lasers have a 3-to-1 damage ratio against plasma. So if they're firing that thing as a deterrent, then like a Magellanic Empire, opposing empire, would be put off by the plasma a bit more likely than anyone using an alpha-type phaser, or an Andromeda for that matter would be. And even then, the Andromedas are only using phaser 2, so they're less good at shooting down plasmas compared to the Tholians would be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. And well, I'm thinking about is the whole issue of play when it comes to the web, because one of the things that the Tholians rely on, in my mind anyway, is that when it comes to the webs, if you poke your head through the web what happens? The Tholians can attack you if they're on the other side of the web. They can immediately fire whatever direct fire weapons they have at you, versus plasma torpedoes. If the Tholians use plasma torpedoes, then it's a delayed reaction. You gotta hope that they stay in place, and obviously also gives them more control over what shield that gets hit at that moment in time.
So now that's the neutron beam. So, but if you go to have a look for the page where it shows the Badavai strike cruiser.
Okay. Which cruiser?
Badavai strike cruiser.
Okay, the strike cruiser. Okay. Okay. What? Loose ball. Sorry. My one cat's being quite lovey-dovey. Yes, the co-host. Okay, I got it up. So they have the CPA.
So you might notice that.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
correct. Now, it has 2 CPA-2s and 1 CPA-3.
Okay.
You should see them on the nacelle caps.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so in terms of the option mounts, like if you're putting these onto a pirate ship or whatever, the CPA-2, it creates 2 boxes on the ship, but
Right.
it only fills 1 option mount box, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But if you look at the CPA-3, it creates 3 boxes,
Right.
but it takes up 2 boxes.
Right.
So
No, it
and
takes up
also,
3 boxes.
No matter how many boxes.
No,
Yeah.
it takes up. It's 3 and it takes up 3.
No, the CPA-3, it creates 3 boxes.
Right.
But if you're installing it onto a ship, it takes up 2 centerline adjacent options.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So basically, now what also happens is you need warp power to arm the CPA.
Right.
It's 3 points of warp power per turn. And depending on how many chambers you have, that's what the boxes represent.
Oh, okay.
On the SSD.
So basically, for each turn, you're
6
charging
or
a different
3
chamber.
turns you can arm it. Yeah. So if you have a CPA-2, you can't arm it to level 3 because it doesn't have the 3rd chamber.
Right. Holy cow.
And you can't hold this weapon either. You have to use rolling delay. So no matter what, you're paying those 3 points of warp power every turn.
Understood.
So the trick is, because like for the Badavai, they actually, in the middle years, they developed the CPA-3 first. So their heavy cruiser has 2 CPA-3s. But closer, like a few decades later, they actually developed the CPA-2 because they got to the point where the CPA-3, they kept it for the bombardment variants, like I guess like direct fire bombardment, I should say, because they have mass drivers for other kind of bombardments. But they decided to try and switch more to the CPA-2 because they found it to be more useful for actual like battles. But the trick is that their war class ships, they actually don't come with enough warp reactors to maintain the proper battle speed until a later refit is applied. So, but if you look at the SSD ship there, basically every turn, regardless of whether you're going to fire the CPA or not, you're paying 9 points of warp power just to keep things ticking over. So there's no discount for holding, but at the same time, there's no overload either.
Right.
So,
Right. Oh yeah.
you basically have to decide. Yeah. Like, are you going to use that CPA 3 as a CPA 3, and is that going to mess up your arming cycle, or will you underload it as a CPA 2 so that you're firing more consistently over the course of the game?
So, wait a minute. Let me see if I understand. And that is, if you want to fire it as a CPA 3, you have to specify that on the first turn of arming.
No, you
Okay.
have to arm it over 3 turns.
Right. Right.
So
But-
there's no fast loading either.
Okay. So, assuming you have a CPA 3, is that even a question? I guess it really isn't. I was thinking about whether the CPA 3, if you could actually leave it at CPA 2 level and do a kind of a rolling delay based on CPA 2.
You can do that, yes.
Oh, okay.
You're not forced to upgrade the warhead. So basically, like, the question would be that if you look at the damage chart for the CPAs,
Right.
if you'd have to basically run the numbers on the side, given the amount of firing opportunities you're going to have over 2 turns instead of 3, and given how much damage each CPA does at level 2 instead of level 3, is it more effective to stick with the CPA 2 for all weapons, or to wait the 3rd turn and, add the CPA 3's firepower to it?
Right.
So basically, the Badavai made the decision that, with some exceptions, because most of the war classes that the Badavai use, like the War Cruiser and War Destroyer, they rely on CPA 2s.
See if we can find the War Cruiser if I have it. I don't think I do. Probably a different book. Yeah.
It's a few pages over. It's like about maybe 10 or 15 pages over, but it's the same SFU book though.
Ah, there it is. Okay. It's much farther down.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be near the top with the rest of the cruisers, but it's not.
Now, because with the exception of the strike cruiser, they mainly go through the middle years cruisers, and then they do the wartime cruisers after.
I did not mean to do that. Okay, there it is. Okay.
Now, you'll notice as well that for the Badavai, all of their heavy weapons are in the forward arc. So they're not like the Amin, because the whole reason why the Amin split their arcs is because they learned the hard way what happens if you try to run into the front of a Badavai ship with its CPAs fully armed.
Right.
So the Badavai, basically, they're more kind of Fed-like in the sense that they want to hit you with direct fire, like head on, or at least somewhere in the front arcs. Whereas the Indian are more kind of like the Klingons, where they want to keep you at a distance. Although, ironically enough, the Badavai have a better turn mode than you. So, for the Tholians, the obvious thing in terms of the SSD would be to take the photon torpedo variant cruisers and ships and replace the photons with something. Now, the way that the firing arcs are on the Tholian ships is that most of the option mount, the weapon mounts, so to speak, are not adjacent to each other. Like, if you look at a Tholian heavy cruiser, it's got photon heavy cruiser rather. It's got one photon on the left side, LF plus L. It's got a separate photon, R on the other side of the ship. And then the front of each of the 2 wedges has photons 3 and 4. So it would not be able to use the CPA3 anyway, which means that by default, the Tholians are going to be using the CPA2, unless they have maybe some sort of dreadnought variant or something, or some
Right.
other variant that does have Jason's photon nodes. But even then, you might say, why would the Tholians use that? Would they not be better off having 2 separate CPAs? Because they've got lots of warp reactors. They've got plenty of warp power. So they don't have to worry as much as Badify. Although, when you think about it, if you have the SSD for the photon heavy cruiser, if you replace all 4 of the photons with CPA2s, that means that that ship is always going to pay 12 points of warp power every turn.
Ouch.
So some of that is taken up by the AWRs, but the rest of it is still coming out of the warp engines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so which means overall it might be a better idea to use the neutron beam from the Anine than the CPA from the Badovai. Because it gives you more flexibility and more maneuverability overall.
Mm-hmm. Or what you could do is, because you could use the you could use the CPA variants as base defense units. So the ship isn't going anywhere; it's sitting behind a layer of web, and then if an enemy ship gets through it, like an Andromedan even, surprise, you've got a big, you get 4 CPA2 shots on your front PA panel. But for open space battles, it would be better to stick with the neutron beam.
Mm-hmm. Understood. But at the same time, you would think that the Tholians would select one weapon instead of using one weapon from each. Two different empires.
Well, in fairness, you could say the same thing in the Alpha Octave, but then ADB decided to give them photon variants. So.
True.
But yes, if they only get one, they should use the neutron beam.
Hmm? Yeah,
but actually, when you think about it, even if you're defending a base, if your ship is parked behind a layer of web,
right,
then as long as you get the enemy ship on your front center line, then you can hit them with all the neutron beams at once, and that's not a bad amount of damage.
Agreed. And as I said, I think having a single weapon, for both mobile and stationary, I was gonna say ships, but that's not right. Battle platforms. There's a nice generic term. Would be best. Definitely would keep down on maintenance.
There are.
Because you'd be able to use the same parts from ships to the bases. So, what are you gonna say?
There are a couple of local weapons that they might want to watch out for. Oh yeah, so when it comes to the weapons that are shooting at them, there's a few they might want to be careful about. Because when the Magadim show up, their main weapon, the tachyon beam, it actually, when it hits properly, it actually damages both the facing shield and the opposite shield at the same time. So
right.
That would be a challenge for the Tholians to deal with. But on top of that, you know how in the Alpha Octans, the drone empires eventually developed the Spearfish drone?
Right.
So there's a similar missile called the CPM that mass drivers can get. The Magadim get them first, but the Vadavai get them later. But what they do is that, because all this time I had thought that what the CPM did is it hits the outer shield for 1 point and then the inner shield for 2 points. But what it actually does is it bypasses the outer shield entirely. It hits the inner shield for 1 point and it does internals for 2 points.
Oh.
So that's against other Magellanic ships. Against galactic ships, it actually hits the shield for the 1 point and then does 2 points of internals, like a spearfish drum.
Wow.
And remember that mass drivers don't travel on the board the way drones do. They're quasi-direct fire weapons, so when the enemy ship is firing at you, you have to deal with it right away. So if the Magadim or Badavai, or even the pirates, who can use mass drivers as well, if they load up, because it's only a certain percentage of your mass driver missiles can be CPM or any other non-standard missile. But if they front load them and decide to fire them at a Tholian ship, then all those thick shields are not going to help very much. Especially because if you're caught in open space with no webcaster or no web snare.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's one question that
And on top of that,
this.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, we can ask is.
oh, sorry. Go.
Okay, go.
Well, the other thing too is there's a species called the Uthiki. They eventually become allies of the Badavai, but then the Andromedans exterminate them. They have a weapon called the boson drill, and the drill from the boson drill, it's like a shield cracker. It damages shields only. But then the bit, because what happens is that when you arm the boson drill, it's 2 points of power from any source for the drill, and then the bit element is 1 point of warp power. So against Magellanic shields, what it does is the drill element affects the outer shields, but ignores the volley reduction factor, and the bit element lands on the inner shield facing. But against galactic shields, the outer shields are affected by the drill, and the bit scores as internals. So if the Uthiki are fighting the Tholians, then they're able to reduce the shields and also score internals with that weapon.
Mm-hmm. Which brings up the question I was going to ask, which is, here's the thing, that let's say that the Tholians landed in the LMC. Now, obviously they have to find a replacement for the particle cannons. Okay, fine. But also, we're talking about a different configuration of shields, and the weapons that are designed in that in the LMC are designed for a different configuration of shielding. Now, here is the question, which is, do you think that the Tholians would actually modify their shield configuration to match the LMCs, the empires that were there, so that they were not a deficit defensively compared to other LMC ships?
No, because if you look at this, the Gendarians, they've been in the LMC for about 100,000 years. At the same time, they've been in both Alpha and Omega. But the Gendarian ships in the LMC still use their regular shields. So I would, and also because I think you have to build a ship from the keel up to have like the Magellanic systems, basically their shipyards kind of construct their ships by default
Okay.
to have things like their sensor scanner systems and their shield network, whatever. So the Tholians will have to completely rework the auto forges, and they
Right.
won't even know how to do that.
Oh yeah, understood.
Bear in mind that the Tholians press a button and the ship comes out. So it takes a long time for them to train the engineers they need to figure out how to build their ships again. So
Right.
I don't think it's worth it. But bear in mind that I think that they'll get by without it. They get by without it. So because their shields are pretty thick, and despite those weapons I just mentioned,
Right.
there aren't that many of them. So, and the web is a useful thing. So, I think that they'd be functional with just the regular layer shields. They just have to be careful relative to how they'd be in Alpha or Omega. So because which of course would be the whole point of anyway. But actually, here's an interesting interaction. If the Sultorians reach the LMC, shield crackers ignore the volley reduction factor. So Soltorian ships are proportionally that little bit more effective against the natives.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But to make up for that, because the particle cannons are so weak, you'd need to use the shield crackers to get the outer shields down, because a lot of the impact from the particle cannons would be lost in the volume reduction factor anyway.
Right. And, well, that doesn't mean anything. I was thinking about, of course, the issue of the inner shields, because, they can't use the shield cracker to bring down the shield so that they can bring Marines on board, which is, I understand that normally, not normally, but the main reason for the shield crackers were to board ships and capture them, but for the most part, that's not the goal of the Soltorians. The Soltorians are want to destroy them. After.
Well, in the LMC, there's two things, because one of them is outer shields, because of the volume reduction factor, they cost twice as much to reinforce. And if I recall correctly, there's no such thing as specific reinforcement. It's only general reinforcement. And also, inner shields can't be reinforced at all. So, once the Soltorians rather, if they concentrate enough fire to get the outer shield down, then as long as they get access to the inner shield, getting that down isn't that much trickier, because if you look at because the inner shields cover 3 facings at once, then they're proportionally more vulnerable. Especially because if you think about it, if an LMC ship wants to lower its shields to beam Marines over somewhere, they have to drop the facing outer shield and the facing inner shield. So that means that the 2 adjacent facings are vulnerable as well.
Right.
So it's not all good news for the way the shield dynamics work. So.
Did not know that.
And also, all those phasers that the Soltorians have, that would help them in terms of shooting down mass drivers, or maybe trying to whittle down a plasma E that the Anine might be using.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That definitely would be an interesting scenario, which is the Soltorians invading, and having the tough part I would think about that is that would there, as I think what we pointed out when it comes to the Omega Octant, one of the reasons why the Soltorians survived was basically because they had a big brother that was helping them out. And the question is there any one with the Tholians basically wipe out the Anine, basically the other empires before the Andromedans show up, and therefore nothing to fight, or would there be the empire within the LMC that actually would be amenable to siding with the Soltorians and helping them to attack the Tholians?
Well, by that point in time, the Andromedans would have mostly completed their conquest of the LMC. So you'd basically see the Soltorians fighting and probably losing against the Andromedans before they got a chance to kill the Tholians. But also, because I suspect that the Tholians could probably end up being, unless they have a way to repair their engines and fly the sphere elsewhere. Like if they're stuck in the LMC, for say if there's an engine breakdown, they might end up losing the sphere to the Andromedans. So they'd have to use the same asteroid shipyards that the Magellanics use. So on the one hand, the Andromedans will be killed with the Soltorians for them. But on the other hand, the Tholians might still be in exile and have to wait for Operation Unity to rescue them from the Andromedans.
That definitely would. Wow. That is a question. If the Andromedans actually would come come the same time, and therefore would actually capture the Dyson sphere, would it actually capture it or destroy it? Because if it captured it, my question then would be, could the Tholians then use that to maybe finish the desecrator that they needed to finish, or possibly move it inside the Dyson sphere for maybe for more protection?
Well, there are rules in Fed and Empire to show like what happens if the Klingons or anyone else succeeds in taking over the Tholians, like how many economic points they get. Now, the Andromedas probably won't get as many because I suspect that the number of EPs that the Tholians have is basically factoring in those the lost Klingon colonies that
Right.
the Tholians control.
Mm-hmm.
So there probably won't be as many EPs that the Tholians would have to spend in the first place, or that the Andromedans can get it once they conquer the sphere.
Right.
But I would suspect that the Andromedans would just treat the sphere as another captured planet, basically. Like they just extract whatever tribute that they get, and then they would keep the desecrator nice far away because they wouldn't want it to be near any of their subject planets. So, but whether or not that would make a difference in terms of how far ahead the Andromedans are in terms of building their cool toys from the Module C3A, it's a good question, but
Yeah.
one I'm
yeah.
not too sure about.
Yeah, because you're bringing in basically an external resource from extragalactic resource into the galaxy, and therefore increasing, in theory, the number of EPs that it can produce. If you're thinking about it at the strategic level.
Well, the other thing is like how many more Andromedans ships are being destroyed to conquer the Tholians. So it could all balance out. It could be that if you include the Tholians and you include any of the Tholian bases with the webs around them, maybe the Andromedans lose a few more ships, motherships, whatever, to take them out. So that any additional resources they get from the sphere as a conquered planet, so to speak, balances out to the same place that you are historically.
Mm-hmm. Understood. Huh. Well, I think.
Now, I should say that I still think that Omega is the most open place to put the Tholians
Yes.
in terms of giving them more options, but
it's
just that ironically the LMC is a tidier one because it's cleaner in terms of knowing what weapons to give them and how to do it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think the alternate history where the Tholians landed in the Omega, I think it would be more possible. I think, and because of it's more like the Alpha Octant, just and because it actually has some open space where you actually can have the Tholians kind of grow their wings, and not have to worry about someone beating down their door. The only reason the Klingons didn't spend more time, fighting the Tholians was because they had another, front called the Federation, which so it did not help. The Klingons really didn't want to spend the resources if they didn't have to, but they felt like they needed to. They couldn't just let the Tholians free range and just expand in that area, which is why they were more than thrilled when the Satorians came. It's like, oh, we want to attack them. The Klingons then didn't have to waste their own ships on attacking the Tholians. They could just say, Satorians, go after them, have fun. So, anyhow, it's getting late. It's time to Shut the sucker down. Gary, it's been a pleasure.
Plug.
Yes, Doug.
Thank you. And
I missed something.
I was just going to say, Paul, that if you or Doug or anyone wants to add your thoughts on the BDS, by all means, pop in and talk with your thoughts.
Okay. We'll do. We'll do. So anyway. Okay. Well, have a good night.
Have a night.
Doug. Always good to have you around. And
Hey, pluggy plug time.
And of course, the usual plug for the.
Hey, just, yes, please.
Yeah. A
All
gamer.
yes, please. Yeah, we got Gamers of Women, or Gamers of Summer, I should say. Sorry.
Yeah.
Coming up in about 3 weeks now.
Yep.
And we're going to be having a SFE tournament there.
Yes, we will.
For anybody listening in SFE land that likes SFE tournaments, Paul will be running a tournament there. Yay!
Yep.
Paul.
Yeah, come on by.
That.
You know, I'll be there. It's Harrisburg. Obviously, look for Gamers of Summer. I think it's gamersofsummer.net. Is that correct, Doug? When it comes to the website?
I believe, yeah. Let's see. Hold on a second here. Yeah, it is gamersofsummer.net. I can actually give you the link here in 1 second. That's it. There we go. That's it. Copy and paste.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay.
Put it in chat. Gamersofsummer.net and yeah. So that'll get you there. But yeah, Labor Day weekends, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. The tournament will be Saturday and Sunday. We have a contingency plan if we have to go to Monday, which is we'll wing it. So as far as I know, that was kind of it. So there's that. And there is a space when you go to register that says remarks. So if you want to sign up for the SFE tournament ahead of time, you can do that.
Yep.
Do that there and just say SFE tournament and maybe let Paul know what ship you want to run. So there you go.
Okay.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Mm-hmm.
So, another possible alternate history with the Tholians, with them in the LMC, which could be interesting. And the question, of course, there's one question that I did not bring up that I just came to my mind, which is, would it be possible that the Tholians would take over the LMC, which would be interesting? Don't know. It would be interesting to see how the Tholian ships would turn out and how good they could actually be against the different ships of the LMC. Because if it's possible, then they could possibly conquer those empires before the Andromedans show up. Of course, then the Andromedans might just wipe the Tholians, and that would make things even more interesting. Because as we already mentioned at the beginning, which is if the Tholians didn't show up, then the Romans would be under the Klingon protectorate, and things would be quite a bit different when it comes to how that and the general war and that all turned out. I'm not exactly sure what the effect that would have on the Federation and so forth, and also the Gorns themselves, because if they're not building plasma ships, they're building basically Klingon ships to fight the Gorns. How does that dynamic work? Oh, agreed. Sorry. Chat room over there. So with that, I am Paul Franz, and I bid you a good night.